Hello and welcome back to Cook With Me Live. Thank you so much for being online with me tonight, and those of you that are just logging in, please give me a little wave, let me know if you're ready to go. Tonight we are making one of my favorite little, I guess you could call them a snack or a side dish or even just a quick treat on the weekend, equally for lunches. We're going to do potato flatbreads. So there's a few things I really want to show you, a few distinctions that I want to talk about tonight. So while everyone's logging in, please let me know who's cooking with you in the kitchen. Let me know whether or not you're cooking with me at the same time or whether you're just watching. I love to hear about that too. And have a think about your best potato question. See how I can test my potato skills. No, maybe don't. But anyways, I do want to bring up that topic on the potatoes. So we're going to touch on that a little bit tonight. And a couple other little basic skills that I can be showing you through this recipe are going to be kind of the basics of how do we flatten something in tortilla form. Especially being a gluten-free kind of item, it's a little bit different to work with. So I kind of want to show you some of those tips and tricks, as well as give you some ideas on what we can do with these potato flatbreads so that you know how to have them, how to eat them, what to have them with, and some hopefully tasty little tricks you can do. So who's online already? Glenda, awesome timing. Welcome. Thank you for being online tonight. Are you cooking with me tonight, Glenda, or are you just watching? Would love to hear. Cool. So potato flatbreads, who's made them? Who's maybe traveled to parts of Eastern Europe where you can have them very traditionally? I'm probably not going to pronounce this correctly, but I do know that there's a very favorite area of the world that has them, particularly in the Scandinavian countries, and one version, at least in the Slovak language, is called lokše. I think I'm pronouncing that somewhat right, but that's a very, very common dish. And the coolest thing about this dish, I think, like a lot of other traditional foods in some of the other cultures around the world, is it's kind of a leftovers dish, as in it's going to be made from cold potato, leftover potato. So it's pretty easy to make a whole bunch of extra potato when you go to cook it. And then with that leftover bit, the next day, once it's cooled, then we can turn this now into flatbreads and have a whole different use out of it. Okay, the same goes if you had mashed potato already. The only difference you might be making is maybe adjusting if you've added a fair amount of oil or butter to it. We could adjust that a little bit, but for the most part, we want to start with cold potato. Very cool. Oh, and Julie and Mel, you guys are cooking tonight. Awesome. Thanks for being online and being in action in the kitchen. Good to see you guys again. Okay, so with our cold potato, ideally it's cold, but if you're using fresh potato, freshly cooked potato, that's okay too. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult to work with. So it's okay, you can still do this recipe. It's just going to be a little bit more sticky. So you might end up using a little bit more flour, and if you're going to have them once they've cooled, they might end up being a little bit firmer. But definitely when they're fresh, they're going to be delicious. Okay, so don't worry about that. They're just going to be a little bit more challenging to work with because they're going to be a bit stickier if you're using warm potato. Okay, so the only other equipment we're going to need is going to be a food processor. Doesn't have to be a whiz bang wow one. Any food processor you've got. You could probably even do this in a blender. The only trouble is that it's going to be a very thick dough. So you're probably going to have to scrape around it a lot, whereas a food processor is actually designed to do this type of blending. Okay, so either a food processor, maybe a blender if you haven't got any form of another food processor, and then we're going to need a frying pan to cook them in. I've got two out because I'm going to do them in half the amount of time by using twice as many frying pans. It's another little efficiency trick. Most people can handle having two frying pans going on at once, and it shouldn't overwhelm you. So that's one way to make it go a bit faster. Those of you that are cooking for a big family, these go down really well with kids, and they're a great lunchbox alternative to bread, especially if they're not that keen on gluten-free bread. This is another alternative. So you might be wanting to do a double, maybe even a triple batch when you do make them. Freeze them, and then they're ready to just warm up either in a toaster or maybe lightly in a frying pan if you've got a bunch, or if you're doing a whole big warm up for a lunch on a weekend, you've got a big family, you can lay them flat on a baking tray and put them under the grill in the oven to heat them up that way. So it's kind of like a toasted sandwich. They also can go in one of the sandwich presses as a nice kind of grilled pide or like a grilled kebab sort of style sandwich or wrap. So there's so many things we can do with this, as you can imagine. Okay, shall we get started, guys? You ready? Cheryl, welcome. Haven't seen you tonight, or haven't seen you in a while. Thank you for being on. Good stuff. Okay, let's get into it, guys. I'm going to make the plain version. Okay, now I've given you other flavor options that you can add in. You can get as creative as you like with these things. I would recommend sticking to spices, herbs. You can go fresh herbs. Try not to add too much liquid to it if you can, but you could even add quite a bit of nutritional yeast. You could add in your favorite kind of spice blends. Even a bit of spice paste can work because it's not too wet or too dry. It's kind of one of those neutral textures. So if you wanted to make a really nice kind of curried naan bread, these are kind of like a consistency of a naan bread as well, to go with your Indian curries and things. So you might want to add a little bit of extra spice to your potato flatbreads at the same time. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to do the plain one, but I'm going to show you a little trick that we can do on top of the plain ones so that we can have them savory, or if we don't do this little topping I'm going to make, then we can have them sweet another day, as in with sweet toppings for breakfast, nut butters, jam, that kind of thing. Okay, so pretty straightforward. We're going to start out with, how can you guys see this best? I'm going to make some space here. So we're going to start out with 400 grams approximately of our cold potato. The other cool thing that happens when the potato cools is it forms a resistant starch, which is actually a really good form of, it's a good form of, I guess, food or fiber for the gut. Okay, so it's not technically a fiber, but that resistant starch is what's going to help our good gut bacteria. So although it is going to kind of warm up when we cook it, having these kinds of things cold, or having the cold potato, is actually pretty good for your gut. Okay, so that's something to consider as well. So we're going to add about 400 grams into this guy. Okay, so as you can see, it doesn't so much matter the shape or size of your potato. We're going to be all blending it up. There we go. That's a little bit much. Let's take a bit of that out. There we go. That'll do. Okay. And if you were to do a double batch, depending on what machine you're using, you could get away probably to do a double batch in one machine, but you might just want to mix up your double batch into a bowl and then pour half of it at a time to get blended. That might be a little bit better results in terms of getting everything mixed up. So tell me, guys, those of you that are on, hello, Jeanette. Oh my goodness, haven't seen you in ages. Hello, welcome. Can you guys tell me if you've ever made anything like this? If you've had potato flatbreads before, do you kind of know what you're expecting tonight? Let me know how you're going with that. Who else do we have? Anwin. Welcome, Anwin. Also, I haven't seen you in a while. Thanks, guys. All right. So, flour. Now, you have choices. We kind of want more of the drying flours because the potato actually holds a significant amount of moisture. So, the options we have are kind of your coconut flour, your sorghum flour, or even you could use a brown rice flour as well. I have made these many times with just coconut or just sorghum. And the differences are pretty much that the coconut flour is going to taste, I guess for the people that are extremely coconut distinguishing, you will be able to tell that it's coconut flour. It is quite nice and sweet though. Those of you that want to bring out more of that potato flavor and much more neutral flavor, you'd go just a sorghum or a brown rice flour. I like a combination. So I'm going to do roughly half and half of each. Okay, so the proper way to measure this, the most reliable way to measure flours, do you guys remember? Those of you that have been done a couple of these before, is to go by weight or volume. Which one? All right, well, I might beat you to the typing in of that, but it's to go by weight. Okay, that's the most accurate way to measure flour, especially for your first time making something. So I'm just going to double check the weights on this, trusting my machine is going to give me a correct answer here. So that was 55 grams. Let's do one of these of sorghum. If we're going to go by weight, we don't need to worry about kind of scooping it gently. So we're looking for about 180 grams. So I'm going to go a little bit more of that guy. Roughly half and half. Doesn't so much matter if it's exact. Okay, and then we're going to need a bunch of extra flour actually for rolling it. So do keep them handy. Keep them out if you can. And again, part of this skill that I want to show you is how do you know which gluten-free flours to use? Because there's such a great selection. Usually the answer is a combination is best. But it's good to have a good understanding of what behavior each of the flours has. And that's something that's quite a bit more detail, a bit more beyond tonight. It's something we go over a lot more in the program. But the idea here is when we're going to be rolling out the dough, it doesn't so much matter which one you choose for that because it's not like a direct part of the flatbread. I'm going to choose a sorghum just because I like the finish in the pan a little bit better. The coconut flour tends to burn a little bit more, so it goes a bit darker. Okay, so that's just another little trick you can keep in mind. Who else do we have online? Hello, Shannon. Thank you for being online. Are the kidlets watching with you tonight too? And Jeanette, your kidlets are probably no longer kidlets. Very cool. Now the flax meal. This is not 100% necessary. I like to take every opportunity I can to add in a little bit of extra fiber into our diet, sneaky, everywhere we can. And the benefit in this recipe is that it's going to help the bind. It's going to help hold it together and make it a little bit more workable. So you don't have to put it in, but I would highly recommend it, especially if you're using golden flax meal. The kids won't be able to tell that it's in there at all. So it's a great opportunity to sneak a whole bunch of extra fiber in. So these are, these flatbreads are going to actually be pretty decent for the gut as compared to something that's just made of flour and, buying a traditional bread in the shops. It's going to have yeast. It's going to have a lot of numbers unless you're making it yourself. Okay, now this is going to make a fair few flatbreads. We are going to use 2 teaspoons of salt. You can adjust that if you like, but because it's making quite a few flatbreads and we want them to kind of taste good on their own as well, then we can kind of go to that extra level with the salt, as long as you're using good salt. That doesn't really apply if you're using table salt. Hopefully those of you guys doing Cook With Me Live, you now know that I'm not a fan of table salt, and maybe hopefully you understand why. All right, how are we going? Welcome, Rachel, hello. Awesome, and Shannon, what did you say? Oh my gosh, you just picked your whole salad from the garden tonight. Wow, that's so awesome. That's gonna put my salad to shame, that's awesome. Hello, Trish. And Jeanette, buckwheat is okay instead of sorghum? Okay, yes. Yes, it is, but it's going to hold a little bit more moisture. So you may just want to adjust that a little bit, Jeanette. If it's too hard to work with, you're going to need a slightly more drying flour with that. So just as a heads up, buckwheat is quite moist. Okay, so that's something to consider. And yes, hello, Rebecca. Beck, welcome. Thank you. Cool, guys. Okay, let's blend this up. This is as simple. Everything went into the food processor, nice cold potatoes. We're gonna try to work with them while they're still cold, but now we need to make this dough. So we've gone from this pile of really dry looking ingredients, don't add any other liquid, and we're gonna extract all of the moisture that we need from these potatoes. So let's crank that up. We just wanna blend it until it's a nice ball of dough. It might take about 25 seconds or so, depending on your machine. Really pushing these machines to their limits. It's good, it's good. It's not that sticky of a dough, or it's not that hard of a machine, even though it sounds like it, but that's what we're looking for, okay? That nice cohesive ball of dough, bingo, okay? So when you first take it out, it probably won't go anywhere. Okay, that's what we want. There we go, we want the stickiness. And it is gonna be a little bit frustrating down the bottom of whatever machine you're using, so you're gonna have to use your spatula. And although I've shown you guys this before, the trick with the spatula is to get down the bottom, press it so it kind of bends underneath the blades, and then we're going to take it around. I'm putting quite a bit of pressure down, and I'm scraping kind of against the middle of that blade so that I can get all of that extra dough to come out. And it should be nice and sticky like this. This is what's going to help us work with it really easily. Okay. And once we get it to this stage, once we divide them into their individual flatbread sizes, then this is where you can kind of get the kids involved too. So they can mess around with this. There's no such thing as an over flattening or an over mixing unless you keep adding a lot more flour, and then they'll just dry out a bit. But if you can kind of limit the amount of flour that they're using, it's okay. You can let them play. It's not like I have memories, fond memories, but memories of my very strict grandmother teaching me how to make bread, albeit with gluten back then. And it was very, very important that I kneaded the dough correctly for the right amount of time, didn't overdo. As a matter of fact, it was with pies that we weren't able to really overdo it. So in this case, that's kind of how gluten-free baking and cooking is actually a lot easier, is because you don't have that worry with overdoing it. Okay, so we've got our sticky bowl of dough. Don't touch it until we get a little bit of extra flour on it, otherwise it'll frustrate you. So we're going to put a little bit of flour on that. We can have some flour on our surface. Let's make sure our hands are really dry. Okay, otherwise it's going to be a bit frustrating. A little bit of flour in our hands, and we're just going to get this ball to a stage that we can work with it in. Okay, so it's okay to use a fair bit of flour. These things are pretty resilient. We want to get it workable. Okay, so there's our potato dough. And now if we put it into an even shape, then we can kind of get sort of even sizes for our individual flatbreads. Okay, so let's call that roughly even. Maybe we'll try to get 6 out of this. So we'll go half and then thirds. Testing your math. Knowing that the end is usually smaller. Let's try that. Okay, so there we have it. So now the kids can probably get into this. Sorry if I said that and that wasn't part of your plan tonight and they're hearing it. Cool. So there's our little flatbread beginnings. They're nice and easy to work with when we get the dough measured out correctly, the flour measured out correctly. There we have it. Okay, so now you have options, and this is kind of why this is a really quick and easy thing to put together. I'm going to turn the frying pan on so it's ready to start cooking these by the time we flatten them. So you don't need to bother coming back. I'm just going to get that happening both at the same time. Let's just heat those up. And here we go. So the easy way is to do them by hand. Okay, so a little bit of flour. We're going to press them by hand. If they get a little bit sticky, you can add a bit more. Okay, and the trick I find is to flatten it out from the middle first, okay, pushing towards the edges. Again, if it gets a little bit sticky, you can add some more flour. And then it's up to you how thick or thin you want these to be. So notice how the edges here are a little bit dry, they're kind of cracking apart. That's maybe an indication that I added a little bit too much flour. Okay, so that's just something to note. We can still kind of stick them back together, but that's the first sign of how your dough is going. So you'll notice too with these is the dough is actually quite forgiving. So you can go pretty thin, even just with your fingers, and it's not going to fall apart on you. Okay, and it's quite resilient. So you can do this by hand. Sometimes I actually like to put it in my hand and just spread my fingers apart to do that spreading. So it just depends how you get comfortable with this. Okay, but it can be that easy. And this is a good thickness. So what are we looking at? We're probably looking at about maybe 3 millimeters thick, okay? But that's okay. It'll end up being kind of a nice, more of a thicker naan bread or kind of a pide thickness, if you will, like the Turkish pizzas. So there we go. That's it, guys. That's literally it. None of these expensive gluten-free options that you can buy pre-made in the shops that cost you like $1.50 per thing. I can only take a guess at how cheap this would have been to make, but a couple of potatoes, bit of flour, flax meal and salt, you can imagine it definitely is not going to cost $1.50 per flatbread. So considering how easy that is, just do a whole bunch of them at once, put them in the freezer, and then you've got these flatbreads ready to go. Okay? So once your pan's on, we're going to put it in dry. So no oil in the frying pan. It's literally this easy. Okay, guys? So you wanted simple recipes? Here you go. Ready? Done. So I'm going to let that heat up with the pan. The pan's not fully hot yet, but that's okay. They're very forgiving, and that's, I guess, the key. The next one I'm going to show you is how we can make them a thinner tortilla. So a bit more of like a proper Mexican style tortilla that you would probably do more rolling as opposed to having as a flatbread. Okay, so how that would look, again, depending on how you want to do this, probably easier if you work with 2 sheets of baking paper. Okay. So there's our first one. We're going to put a little bit of flour down, not too much. Okay. We'll just kind of flour both sides. And then we put the other sheet down. And then you get your rolling pin. If you haven't got a rolling pin, you can just use a bottle of wine wrapped in plastic wrap. That's another option as well. Okay, and then I'm just putting gentle pressure, okay? Because if I put too much pressure at once, I'm going to get a big indent and it's going to be really hard to roll it out flat. So gentle pressure in a few directions. Let's make ourselves some space here. And we're trying to kind of keep that circular shape, but I don't know about you, I think it still tastes the same whether it's square or circular. And now you'll notice that I'm kind of getting a little bit of wrinkling of the paper, like it's kind of starting to grab onto the paper because it's really stuck. So at that point, it's usually a good idea to peel it back and then add a little bit more flour. But the trick here is don't just lift it like this, okay? Because you're gonna get ripping. So the trick is to peel it back on itself and press down as you pull back, and then you won't get any ripping of the paper. So see what I mean by that crease underneath? So when we have this, it just means that we haven't quite got enough flour and things could possibly come on or rip because they're not sliding enough. So I'm just going to put a tiny bit more flour. This side's pretty much done, but a tiny bit more flour. I'm going to flip this over, unstick this side. So can you see that? Can you see that detail? I'll get you to zoom in there. See how it's really grabbing and increasing? So we kind of don't want to get that far because then it can be a little bit challenging to peel off, but the same approach. Okay, so we want to peel it back nice and flat, and then we shouldn't have an issue. Good stuff. So let's bring those floury edges in. We don't want to have because this flour now, see this visible flour? That's not going to go away in the frying pan. So we kind of want to reduce that as much as possible, otherwise it's going to taste quite floury. Okay, and then we'll give it one last little flatten. See how much it slips now? That's great. And there's our much bigger but much flatter tortilla. Looks like a bit of a hand, actually. How's everyone going? Who tried that with me? Well, Lena, awesome. Hello, welcome. And another Rachel, thank you. Excellent, guys. So who tried that? Did that work for you guys? Good, let me know. Okay, so in order to get this one into the pan, it's probably easier if we take it off the page. So we might just do that flip trick again, loosen up both sides, peel it back on itself. And then that side's going to be loose enough to just slide it into the pan, in theory. Let's see how we go. Okay, so we've got some nice warm pans happening here. Can it slide? There we go. Okay, and if it folds up on itself, we should be able to grab it still and flatten it. There we go. Okay, so the key here, dry frying pan. As in, we haven't added oil, we haven't added anything because we want it to kind of toast rather than fry. This one's probably ready to turn, so let's get under there. It's going to be easiest if you have a really thin-edged flipper, because sometimes it can get a little bit bunchy. But as long as it's been cooking long enough on that side, it should be easy to flip. Okay, so now this is why the video is so valuable as opposed to just guiding you in a recipe. This is an indication that the pan is not hot enough, okay? Because we didn't get any toasting. It's dry, but it hasn't been toasted. So we kind of want it to cook a little bit faster than that. Otherwise, we're going to end up with kind of a dry, not so yummy flatbread. But that's okay. This is all just part of the learning, and I wanted to show you both sides. The contrast to that is if the pan gets too hot, you're going to get burn spots before it actually cooks through. Okay, so that's just how you know how to adjust your pans. Unfortunately, there's not one answer that I could just give everyone because everyone's pans are different as well as the heat of their stovetop that they're using. So it's just something you just got to go by feel, and it's that easy. Okay, this is not hot enough, and if you get black burnt spots too early, that's too hot. So you go somewhere in between. I've got these both set to 7 out of 9. Pretty soon here, I'm guessing I'm going to have to turn them down a bit because once they heat up fully, that's going to be too hot. Okay, so we don't want to try to flip them too early, otherwise they're just going to kind of rip on us. So this one being that it was thinner and the pan was already quite hot, I'm just going to test it. See how it's not wanting to lift as a whole? It's kind of bending on me. So that's not going to be done yet. I'm going to let that go a little bit longer. Okay, so let's do a couple more rollings and then I'll show you some more detail what to expect. How's everyone going? Who's rolled it already? Cherie, welcome, hello. Okay, everyone's too busy rolling. So let's do the hand one again. So if we're gonna do the hand, we can just flatten it literally by hand. If it gets a bit sticky, we can add a bit more flour. Okay. I haven't quite got to that fancy Italian stage where I can like bend it over my fist. I don't know how they do that. You probably need a really high gluten flour for that, hey? So it acts like glue rather than potato starch. Okay, a little bit more flour. This is another alternative if you just want to keep your flour down, but you don't want to roll it out. So the cool thing I think to see here is how easy they are to work with. And especially if you want to start getting the kids into this kind of cooking, it's something very forgiving and also very yummy that they can get excited about. Okay, so just make sure you have enough flour down. How are we going? Anyone like excited at how easy these are? Hope so. I am. What's everyone going to have them with tonight? Those of you that are going to cook it straight away? I'd love to hear. I'm just, like I said, once I get a couple cooked here, I'm going to show you what I'm going to put on top of them. But otherwise, I'm just going to have them with a nice, humongous salad tonight and enjoy them for what they are. So there you go. Another one ready to go. Doesn't have to be too thin, but that's a good happy medium between the first one we did purely by hand and the second one with the rolling pin. Let's come back and see how we're going here. Okay, so we'll check on this guy. Looking good, maybe not quite there yet with the pan, but that's more what we're looking for. So that nice even browning throughout would be ideal. Okay, let's see how this one goes. Okay, so it's a very subtle difference, but did you see how it's kind of, it lifted for me? See how it's lifting all around rather than just stretching where I've got the flipper? That's what we want. So that's a sign that this side is done. Done perfectly. That's awesome. Okay. What you can do too when you serve them, oh look, we're going to get an air bubble in here too, like a perfect, like a proper pita bread. So it's going to form an air bubble in the middle, and if we're lucky, we might even be able to pry that open like a proper pita bread and be able to stuff it. Okay, but because we don't have the gluten, it might tear a little bit on us, but that's okay. Okay, so another couple of tricks. First trick is when they come fresh out of the pan like this, they're going to be nice and soft, but nice and crispy on the edges. If you were to stack them on a plate and cover them with a tea towel, a clean tea towel, then they're going to kind of self-steam and they're going to be nice and rollable. So it's going to kind of reduce that crispiness of the edges, and it's going to let them be a little bit more easy to roll. So you might like to do that, make a whole stack of them, serve them for dinner. Everyone can have their rolled up. You can even do these as Mexican wraps, guys. Like even if, just because they've got potato in them doesn't mean they're not Mexican. You can still use these as your tortillas if you wish. But we are getting a pretty nice pita happening here, a nice bit of air pocket forming in the middle. So that's one advantage of doing them quite thin. Okay, questions. Who's with me on this one? Who's doing it? Jeanette, just going to record this for later. Such good timing. We have cold potato in the fridge. I love it. That's awesome. Very cool, Jeanette. Okay, so here's what I'm talking about with a bit of better browning on that side. So this one's now done. Now that that pan has come to heat, that one is great. Okay, so we'll leave that one aside, get the next guy going. And then we can check on this one. So pretty easy, right? I bet you didn't think that a gluten-free something like that could be that simple. Look at that. Look at that puffy wrap. I'm gonna peel it open now because I want to show you guys. This is kind of, actually no, I want to show you something else first. Let's come back. I'll show you something else. But now that I've got my pan going, I want to keep my tortillas going. So let's see how fast we can do this. Flatten one up. Hopefully no one was quick enough on the timer. We could just whack one of these on top. There we go, into the pan. Okay, so here's the other trick I wanted to show you with what we can put on top of them. So traditionally in Slovakia at least, when they're serving lokše, like we have, pizza joints or fast food kebab places, they have lokše places where they sell these potato flatbreads. And you get to choose your toppings and your fillings. But most commonly when they finish them with a good basting of pork fat or duck fat or butter. So those are options. Probably in this part of the world, we'd probably go for olive oil. Maybe, unless you have access to some of those things and love them. So what I like to do is give myself a little bit of an oil kind of drizzle. And then I just put in some herbs and spices as you please. You could get really fancy, take out your mortar and pestle, get some fresh herbs from the garden, aka Shannon, get some fresh herbs from the garden, and you could grind them down in the mortar and pestle with some oil, and then use that deliciously flavored green oil to baste over top of these. Okay, that's an option. The other option, if you don't have all that to access for you, is maybe in a past time you've got a green powder that you've dehydrated from those herbs, those excess herbs, or maybe you've just purchased an all-purpose greens herb mix. So even if it's still in like chunky pieces of green herb, that's okay, you can still use it. This is a ground version of garden herbs that I had, so I can't even exactly remember what's in here. I think it's got lots of parsley, some sage, some mother of herb, which kind of tastes like basil and oregano and things all in one, and probably a 3 or 4 other ones. So I'm just going to put a little bit of that green, beautiful flavored powder into this. Okay, it is probably going to turn the dusting a little bit green, but that's okay. And I want to get a little bit of Italian spice mix in here. So this has got a fair bit of pepper in it. It's probably got oregano, basil, looks like some rosemary in there. So I'm going to add that. That's actually probably not quite enough because there's going to be a fair few of these. Let's put a couple of those in. Maybe you've got a little bit of garlic powder. Might make it a nice garlic bread on top. Okay, so this is another alternative for like a traditional garlic bread. You could have this alongside your spaghetti bolognese. You could have this with soup. With the minestrone would be delicious. Garlic bread and minestrone, garlic flatbread. And you may or may not want another touch of a little bit of extra salt on top, but just a touch. Okay, so now you can just stir this by hand and even just rub it on with your fingers, or if you happen to have one of these fancy little basting brushes, then we're just going to stir that into a nice little oil spread. So see how we just mixed all that up? The same effect could have happened with a mortar and pestle. Got our 2 little flatbreads here, and then we're just going to give them a nice brushing. Okay, so this obviously went green because I used all that green powder, but if you didn't put that in, you could just have a kind of a nice oiled top. And then, because I don't want to wait for dinner, and I just want to have a bite of this and show you guys what it's like. Oh, yes, look at that flatbread. Okay, so see how nice and airy? Look how, we kind of have the pita happening. Look at that. Oh, there we go. It kind of ripped on me, but if I was gentle, I probably could have had a whole pita experience with that. Okay, so that's one other option you guys have. You can make a traditional pita. I want to see how it is. Who's eating with me? It is yummy, Shannon. You're exactly right. Jeanette, what flour am I dusting with? Good question. I was using sorghum flour. Sorry to talk with my mouth full. It's really good. So I was using sorghum flour. It is quite a drying flour, that one, Jeanette. So you could use coconut flour. Well, coconut flour is drying as well. But I find that coconut flour does kind of look a little bit more burnt than the other flours. Or you could use a brown rice flour, and even the buckwheat that you were using before you could use too. Okay? Any other questions, guys, on how this all comes together? Hey, Brett, how's it going? Are you cooking with me tonight, Brett? What do you think? Would you guys be adding a bit of an oil to that to serve it? What would be your kind of preference? I'm keen to hear. I've also kind of painted the kitchen a little bit with my oil splatters everywhere. Come back, let's check on these. So we had this one in first. It smells a little bit burnt, actually. Let's see how we went. Oh, not too bad, but that's kind of borderline on the sign of getting a bit too hot here for the final cooking. Oh, look, we're getting a cool air bubble. Oh, and it let go. There we go. How's this guy? Oh, too burnt. So that's just a sign that one's a little bit too hot, or I just had it on there too long. Okay, but that's okay. That's going to flake off. We are getting a little bit of pita bubbling happening here. But that's about it, guys. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Potato flatbreads. Hopefully you can see that they are easier than you would have thought originally. The other little thing to keep in mind, I guess some people have a fear of potatoes, I've noticed. So something to keep in mind is that this poor little potato, the maligned potato, does not deserve the hatred that we send it or the lack of love that we send it. So guys, the potato, yes, I know people say, you know, it's full of starch and you shouldn't eat it, it's going to spike your blood sugar. Yes, but in some cases, we need to consider what are we having it in alternative to, as an alternative to, okay? And for a lot of people, if you're making it from home, you're using organic potatoes and you're having it in this fashion, it's gonna be a lot better of an alternative than what most people are having otherwise, okay? Especially if you're having any other forms of, you know, I guess, rich cheat foods, because you're not allowing yourself a potato. The potato has got really good quality amino acids. It's got a great amino acid balance in it. And although it doesn't quite have enough protein to live on if you were to just eat potatoes, the potato still has protein, guys, believe it or not. And it has a great balance of the other macros if you're worried about macros. And those of you that have never heard about it, there is a man that did a study, and for an entire year, like literally 365 days, this man ate nothing but potatoes. Different varieties of potatoes, including sweet potatoes, but just potato for an entire year. Not only did he lose weight and feel amazing, but his diet and his health didn't suffer. So it's really an interesting thing. You can search it. I think it's called Spud Fit, or the guy that ate potatoes for a year. But it's a very interesting thing to kind of have a newfound appreciation for this poor little potato that gets pretty maligned and I guess unappreciated in our world. Okay, so there we have it, guys. Potato flatbreads. I would love to hear how you've enjoyed them, like what you've had them with. Like I said, if you're going to freeze them, you can freeze them like this. Once they're cool, you should be able to freeze them without needing to put paper in between. And if you're really worried about it, when you freeze them vertically so that they don't all compress onto each other in the freezer and stick together. So you'd pack them, like you'd put them all on top of each other, and then you freeze them vertically so they're less likely to stick together. Take one out, stick it in the toaster, and you've got a nice warmed flatbread that you can have with whatever you want to have. How'd we go? Jeanette, thanks. You're having pumpkin curry tomorrow with cumin and fresh coriander and oil drizzle on amazing potato flatbreads. That's awesome. And Beck, you have no fear of potatoes. Yes, go the potato. Very cool, guys. Thank you so much for yet another Cook With Me episode. In terms of the rest of the salad that I'm going to have this with tonight, not that this is really, you know, something you guys need to worry about, but I'm going to finish pulling together what I started earlier. It's kind of going to be a bit of like a Greek salad. I'm going to add a bunch of this beautiful head of butter lettuce. Check this baby out. Is that not amazing? Shannon, I bet the ones you grew in your garden look better than that though. But it's my favorite lettuce. It's just buttery and delicious. Bit of avocados. We might even have a couple of fresh peas on there. Did you guys know it's fresh peas season? I'm gonna grab a couple out. Some of you may have never had a fresh pea out of the pod before. So here's what they look like. Yes, this is where peas come from. Here's how you get into them. You unzip them, so you grab that little tip at the end, this end, and you unzip them. Then you crack them open by pinching. Look at those peas. And then you put your thumb in and you pull the peas out. There we go, fresh peas. So I'm gonna have this with a fresh garden salad tonight, add a bunch of avocado on top, have a bunch of bits, and enjoy my potato flatbreads. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time on Cook With Me Live. See ya.